The soft glow of Valerie Collins' monitor reflected in her tired eyes as she filled in the final cell of the last spreadsheet of the day. She leaned back, rolling her shoulders, and glanced at the clock glowing in the corner of her screen. 5:48 p.m. 12 minutes until freedom. In her mind, she was already stepping into her tiny Hawthorne apartment, opening the windows to the cool Portland air, and flipping through a bookmarked recipe she had planned to try tonight. Something warm, buttery, maybe with blueberries. The thought alone eased the tension in her shoulders. But the moment she allowed herself that breath of relief, she heard footsteps and the faint rustle of fabric. She turned just in time to see Renee Thompson appear in the doorway, wearing her signature pale pink blouse and that artificial, sugary smile Valerie had come to dread. On anyone else it might have looked pleasant. On Renee it meant trouble. "Valerie," Renee sang, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Could you come to my office for a moment?" The words hit Valerie like a cold splash of water. So much for going home early. She stood so quickly her elbow clipped a stack of documents, nearly sending them flying. With an apologetic smile, she hurried after Renee, heart already sinking. Inside the office, Renee reached into her desk and pulled out a large, wide envelope, the kind used for legal contracts. She pressed it into Valerie's hands with an air of exaggerated importance. "This contract is urgent," she said, lowering her voice as though delivering state secrets. "It must be delivered to our partner company before the end of the day. Their executives need to sign it tonight." Valerie blinked in confusion. "Tonight? It's almost 6. "I'm aware," Renee replied coolly, checking her watch. "Which means you have about 1 hour. So do not waste time." Valerie swallowed. Her cozy evening evaporated like steam. Renee continued. "There's a company car waiting outside the main entrance. The driver's name is Caustic. You probably haven't ridden with him yet. He'll take you." Caustic. The name didn't ring a bell, but with Renee watching her like a hawk, Valerie nodded quickly and clutched the envelope to her chest. "That's a good girl," Renee added with a thin smile. "And Valerie, make sure you don't mix anything up." Valerie stepped out of the office, repeating under her breath like a mantra, "Contract, car 1 hour, contract, car 1 hour." Her pulse quickened as she hurried through the lobby, pushing through the glass doors into the evening air. Parked near the entrance was a sleek black company car. Without hesitation, Valerie yanked open the back door, slid inside, and exhaled sharply, only then realizing the whirlwind she had just stepped into. Valerie barely caught her breath as she pulled the door shut behind her. The interior of the black sedan smelled faintly of leather and something clean like cedar. She leaned forward, clutching the envelope to her chest. "You're Caustic, right?" she asked, still trying to steady her breathing. The driver turned his head slightly. He was dressed in a dark suit, far too polished for a typical company chauffeur, and his composure was so calm it bordered on elegant. His expression softened into a polite, almost amused smile. "Yes," he said simply. "That's me." Relief washed through her. "Great. Sorry for barging in like that. I'm in a rush. End of day emergencies. You know how it is." He nodded once and started the engine, guiding the car smoothly away from the curb. Valerie watched him for a moment, noting his perfect posture, the steady movement of his hands on the wheel. "You look like you've been napping out here half the afternoon," she said teasingly, forcing lightness into her voice. "Must be nice, sitting in a warm car while the rest of us are dealing with spreadsheets and deadlines." His eyebrows lifted in surprise. Then a quiet laugh slipped out, low, warm and genuine. "I'm afraid it wasn't quite that relaxing," he replied. "But still better than having Renee breathing down your neck all day," Valerie said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "She micromanages everything. I swear she has some kind of radar for when people start enjoying their work. Traffic thickened as they headed deeper into Portland's evening rush hour. Outside the windows, headlights reflected across wet pavement and streetcars rattled by. Valerie continued, unable to hold back her frustration. She even has a nickname in our department, Valerie confessed. Tarakanovna. Kind of like, I don't know, a sticky-fingered tattletale. Always creeping around. Always watching. The driver let out a soft, involuntary laugh, the kind of person releases when caught off guard by something unexpectedly funny. Valerie glanced at him through the rearview mirror and saw his eyes warm with curiosity. He seemed amused by her, drawn in even. "So you bake?" he asked after a moment, his tone gentle. Valerie perked up. "Oh yeah, I love it. My kitchen is tiny, but it's my sanctuary. Give me a mixing bowl and a jar of jam, and I'm the happiest person in the world." Another soft laugh. "That sounds refreshing." They turned into the parking lot of a modern office complex. The car rolled to a stop near the main entrance. Valerie sat up straighter, tightening her grip on the envelope. "I'll only be 5 minutes," she said. "Could you wait for me? It's late, and I'd rather not take the bus home." He met her eyes through the mirror and nodded. "Of course. I'll be here." When Valerie slipped back into the car after the delivery, the rush of the last hour finally began to fade. She clicked her seatbelt into place and let out a shaky breath. Christopher looked tired now. Still composed, still polite, but undeniably worn from the long drive and the late hour. The exhaustion in his eyes nudged something impulsive inside her. "You know," she began, hesitating for only a second before the words tumbled out. "If you want to take a short break before driving again, you could come up to my place. Just 5 minutes. Tea. Something warm." She winced at herself. "You look like you could use it." He turned his head, slightly, studying her. There was no irritation in his expression, only quiet surprise. For a heartbeat. She braced for a polite refusal. Instead, he nodded. 5 minutes sounds perfect, he said softly. Valerie blinked. "Okay, great. Just follow me." They climbed the narrow wooden staircase of her old Hawthorne apartment building, each step creaking under their weight. Valerie pushed open her studio door, suddenly hyper-aware of its smallness, until she saw the way Christopher stopped just inside the threshold. He wasn't looking at the size of the place. He was looking at the shelves. Lining the walls were rows of glass jars, big ones, tiny ones, round ones, tall ones, filled with homemade jams, dried cherries, loose teas, spices, baking flour, sugar, oats, and every ingredient she loved. The entire space carried a soft scent of vanilla and something warm, like a memory baked into the air. "This is remarkable," Christopher said quietly, his voice colored by genuine admiration. Valerie's cheeks warmed. "It's my hobby, I guess." She moved quickly to the kitchen nook, setting water to boil. From a covered plate, she lifted a linen cloth, revealing fresh cherry hand pies she had baked the night before when she couldn't sleep. "I don't know if they're still any good," she said, placing one in front of him. "But, well, you can try." Christopher picked up the pastry with deliberate care. One bite in. He stilled, his eyes closed, breath catching almost inaudibly. When he opened them again, they were different, brighter, but also far away, as if he had been pulled into a memory. "My mother used to make pies like this," he murmured. "I haven't tasted anything like it in years." Valerie softened, instinctively lowering her voice. "I'm glad it reminds you of something good." Tea steeped. Conversation unfolded without effort. They talked about kitchens, childhood, the comfort of homemade food, and Valerie's quiet dream of opening a tiny bakery someday. Neither noticed how quickly time was passing. An hour slipped by, then another, when Christopher finally rose to leave. The reluctance in both of them was impossible to miss. The next morning, Valerie arrived at the office, still thinking about the strange warmth of last night, the tea, The laughter, the cherry pies, the unexpected comfort of talking to a man she barely knew. But the moment she stepped through the glass doors into the fluorescent-lit workspace, reality returned with a cold thud. Renee Thompson was waiting for her. "Oh, Valerie," Renee called, voice coated in that saccharine sweetness that always felt like a threat. "Perfect timing. I have a few small tasks for you." Her smile never reached her eyes. For the next hour, Renee handed her a stream of trivial jobs, photocopying labeling, reorganizing a supply cabinet, each assignment delivered with thinly veiled condescension. Valerie would have sworn Renee found pleasure in watching her run in circles. "Now, take these to the director's office," Renee said finally, thrusting a neatly bound folder into her hands. "And don't drop them." Valerie bit back a retort. She had never been to the director's office. She wasn't even sure she knew the exact location. But she nodded, adjusted her grip on the documents, and headed upstairs. The moment she opened the door, her breath caught. Sitting casually on the sofa, relaxed, elegant, completely at home, was the driver, Christopher. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "You, what? Why are you?" she stammered, unable to form a full sentence. Christopher looked up from his phone, and a slow, warm smile spread across his face. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the kind of practiced ease she had never seen him use yesterday. "I suppose I should officially introduce myself," he said lightly. "I'm Christopher Lowell." Valerie blinked. The name hit her like a blow. Christopher Lowell. CO. The Christopher Lowell. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I'm your what?" she whispered. He chuckled. "I'm not actually a driver, Valerie." The room tilted. Heat surged through her body, mortification so sharp it made her dizzy. All at once, she remembered everything she had said in the car yesterday. The jokes about him dozing off. Complaints about Renee. Calling her Tarakanovna. Inviting him to her apartment. Feeding him pies. She felt her knees begin to give. The folder slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a soft slap. Christopher stepped forward quickly, picking it up. Then, with surprising gentleness, he used the folder like a fan, waving a cool breeze toward her face. "Breathe," he said softly. "You're okay." She was absolutely not okay. Just then, the door swung open. Renee stepped inside, her prepared smile faltering the moment she saw Valerie wobbling and Christopher standing inches from her, fanning her like someone precious. The expression on Renee's face froze in place. And that was the final straw. The room spun, and Valerie finally collapsed under the weight of sheer mortification. When Valerie returned to the office the next day, the atmosphere felt different, charged, watchful. Conversations seemed to quiet as she passed. A few coworkers glanced at her, whispering behind their hands. Others exchanged looks that hovered somewhere between curiosity and judgment. It didn't take long for Valerie to understand why. Someone had clearly seen her collapse in Christopher Lowell's office. Someone else must have caught a glimpse of the CEO fanning her with a folder. From there, the story had spread like wildfire, distorted, embellished, twisted into something far more dramatic than reality. By mid-morning, Valerie could feel the weight of those rumors pressing down on her. She kept her head down, pretending not to hear the murmurs trailing her through the hallway. But Renee Thompson didn't bother with subtlety. Renee's hostility, once wrapped in artificial politeness, now emerged in sharp, open resentment. Every comment had a bite. Every instruction dripped with passive-aggressive disdain. "Well, well," Renee drawled at one point, leaning against Valerie's desk. "Our rising star. Be careful not to faint again. We wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone important." Valerie swallowed her frustration. Fighting back would only feed the fire. Late that morning, both of them were summoned to Christopher's office. Renee straightened her blouse and lifted her chin as they entered, trying to reclaim her sense of authority. Valerie followed quietly, bracing herself for whatever awaited. Christopher sat at his desk, posture calm and businesslike. There was no trace of the warmth he'd shown in her apartment. Only professionalism, controlled and measured. "Please sit," he said. They obeyed. "We have a major meeting with our business partners this Thursday," he continued. "We are hosting them, so everything must be prepared with care." He turned to Renee first. "Renee, as usual, you'll manage logistics, room setup, printed materials, tech support, coordination." Renee nodded sharply. "Of course, Mr. Lowell." Then Christopher shifted his gaze to Valerie. "And Valerie," he said, "you'll be responsible for arranging the full buffet." Valerie's head snapped up. "Me?" "Yes," Christopher replied with complete confidence. "Choose a catering service, review the menu, and finalize everything. I trust your judgment." Valerie's heart fluttered between shock and determination. She knew what this meant, and she knew Renee saw it too. Renee's eyes widened in outrage before narrowing into a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Lowell," she began stiffly. "She doesn't have experience with something like this." "Perhaps it would be better if—" "That won't be necessary," Christopher interrupted, his tone cool but firm. "Valerie can handle it." The meeting ended. As Valerie and Renee left the office, the tension was almost palpable. Valerie hadn't asked for a competition, but one had begun all the same. Renee's stride was rigid and silent beside her. The quiet war between them had officially started that evening. Long after most employees had gone home and the office lights had dimmed to a soft glow, Valerie remained at her desk. The building felt cavernous and quiet. The hum of the HVAC, the only sound accompanying her as she sifted through catering options on her monitor. She clicked through menus carefully, comparing prices, delivery windows, plating styles, and reputation. Her heart beat a steady mixture of nerves and determination. This banquet wasn't just another assignment. It was her chance to prove she wasn't the incompetent intern everyone seemed to believe. After nearly an hour of searching, she finally found a company that felt right. Fresh, simple, elegant within budget. Exactly the kind of food Christopher's partners would appreciate. She scribbled the number on a sticky note and pressed it to her monitor, planning to call first thing the next morning. Then she gathered her things and headed home. The next morning, Valerie arrived early, clutching her travel mug of tea as though it were armor. She took a deep breath, sat down, and dialed the catering company. "Good morning," she began. "This is Valerie Collins calling to confirm yesterday's order for the Lowell meeting." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the representative said calmly, "but that order was canceled last night." Valerie blinked. "Canceled? No, that can't be right. I placed the request yesterday evening." "Yes, ma'am. Someone called after hours and asked us to void the order. We have the cancellation logged at 7:42 p.m. For a moment, everything inside her went still. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the phone. A cold wave of disbelief washed over her, followed by a rush of heat, anger, humiliation, and a creeping fear that threatened to swallow her whole. Someone had done this on purpose. She slowly lowered the phone, staring into nothing as the realization settled in. "Renee," as if summoned by Valerie's thoughts. Renee Thompson appeared in the hallway, striding past with her planner clutched to her chest. She didn't say a word, but the wide, triumphant smirk she flashed spoke volumes. The kind of smirk someone wears when they know they've struck first. Valerie felt her stomach twist. Shame, fear, a suffocating sense of failure. But beneath all that, something else flickered. Something sharp. Something that refused to die. No, she wouldn't let Renee win. Not like this. Not when she'd been trusted with something important. Not when her job and her dignity were on the line. She straightened abruptly. The panic in her chest hardened into resolve. If the catering was gone, she'd find another way. She would not be defeated. Not today. For several seconds after the cancelled order call, Valerie stood frozen beside her desk, her pulse roaring in her ears. The meeting was in less than 2 hours. There was no time to beg another company, no time to scramble for a last-minute replacement. Every catering service in Portland would already be booked this late in the morning. Renee had backed her into a corner, but corners could force people to move. And Valerie moved. She grabbed her bag, sprinted through the office, and pushed through the revolving doors into the misty Portland air. A cab was slowing near the curb, and she waved it down with shaking hands. "Downtown, fast, please," she gasped, sliding inside. The cab peeled away from the building. Valerie pressed her palms to her knees, forcing herself to breathe. She could crumble or she could fight. And fighting, quietly, stubbornly, was the only thing she had left. By the time the cab reached her apartment building, she was no longer a panicked intern. She was a woman with a plan. The moment she swung open her front door, she became someone else entirely. Valerie, the home baker. Valerie, the creator of warmth and order in a world that so often felt cold. She tossed her bag aside, tied on the first apron she grabbed, and threw open her cupboards. Her kitchen welcomed her like an old friend. Glass jars lined the shelves, spices, dried fruit, homemade jams, oils, flours, creams, and berries. Everything she needed. Everything she always kept stocked, because baking was the one place she never felt small. She moved fast, instinctively, fearlessly. Deviled eggs first. The yolks whisked with homemade cheese, dill, and softened butter. Chicken liver pâté, tartlets next. Rich, smooth, and packed into tiny flaky shells. She kept frozen for moments like this. Cucumber canapés assembled with cool cream cheese and fresh herbs. And last, the thing that never failed her, cherry hand pies. The same ones Christopher had tasted in her apartment. The ones that reminded him of childhood. Flour dusted the air. The oven radiated heat. And within 40 frantic minutes, Valerie stood surrounded by trays of warm appetizers. She boxed everything as neatly as she could, grabbed every spare container she owned, and raced back down the stairs. Another cab screeched to a halt, and she loaded the boxes inside with trembling hands. Back to Lowell and Company, as fast as possible. Traffic crawled, but she didn't let herself panic. When the cab finally pulled up to the building, she leapt out, carrying as many boxes as her arms could manage. Inside, she rushed to the staff area. "Girls, please help me. We need to set everything up right now." Her co-workers, stunned by her urgency, immediately followed. Together, they laid out canapés, tartlets, and pies across the tables in the break room. Meanwhile, down the hall, Renee stood beside the empty tables she expected to stay empty. Chin lifted, expression smug, certain of Valerie's failure, completely unaware that Valerie was about to walk back in. When the conference room doors finally opened, the hallway filled with the quiet shuffle of polished shoes and murmured conversation. Christopher Lowell stepped out first, followed by 3 visiting partners in tailored suits, each wearing the stiff, reserved expression common in high-stakes negotiations. It was time for their scheduled break. Renee straightened immediately, smoothing her blouse and preparing for her moment of triumph, expecting the partners to be greeted by empty tables, expecting Christopher to witness Valerie's failure. But the moment the group rounded the corner, the energy in the hallway shifted. The tables were full. Rows of deviled eggs, pâté tartlets, cucumber canapés, and warm cherry hand pies waited invitingly on linen-covered surfaces. A gentle aroma of herbs, spices, and baked fruit drifted through the space. The partners paused. One of them lifted his brows. "This looks delightful." Another leaned in to inhale the scent. "Is this homemade?" Before anyone could answer, Christopher reached for the closest plate, an egg half filled with a yellow, herb-speckled cream. A deviled egg. He lifted it, studying the texture almost cautiously. Then he took a bite. The reaction was instantaneous. His eyes widened as if the flavor had reached someplace deep inside him. Nostalgic, familiar, startling in its simplicity. The warmth of the yolk mixture, the dill, the softened cheese, it was as if he'd been suddenly transported back to childhood Sunday mornings in his mother's kitchen. "This," he whispered, "is extraordinary." Encouraged, one of the partners tried a tartlet. He closed his eyes, tilting his head back with a soft groan of appreciation. "This is unbelievable," he said, turning to Christopher. "Whoever made this needs to open a restaurant." Another picked up a cucumber canopy and laughed softly. "This tastes like summers at my grandparents' farm." Within seconds, all three partners were sampling everything on the table, each dish sparking a new memory. The stiff, professional atmosphere dissolved into something warm and unexpectedly intimate. They began sharing stories, childhood gardens, mothers baking pies, holiday dinners long past. Laughter echoed in the break area. Renee stood to the side, frozen, her expression draining of color as she watched the admiration building around Valerie's food. Christopher took a small step back from the table, scanning the room. His gaze landed on Valerie, standing near the door, hands clasped nervously, not wanting to intrude. "Valerie," he called, ignoring Renee completely. "Come here, please." His tone was gentle, steady, inviting. The partners looked up with genuine interest as she approached. Cheeks warm with embarrassment and pride mingled together. "Tell them," Christopher said with a soft smile, "what these wonderful creations are." And in that moment, standing in front of astonished partners and her stunned supervisor, Valerie realized she had turned the tide. She hadn't just saved the meeting, she had transformed it. When the partners finally left the building, warm, satisfied, and repeatedly praising the unforgettable homemade buffet, the office exhaled in relief. Valerie stood in the hallway, still trying to process what had happened. Her hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the whiplash of the last few hours. Before she could steady herself, Christopher's assistant appeared. "Mr. Lowell would like to see you. Both of you." Valerie turned and saw Renee already walking stiffly toward the director's office. Her jaw clenched, her steps sharp and clipped. Valerie followed, quietly, heart-pounding. Inside, Christopher sat behind his desk, expression unreadable, cold, formal, controlled. He gestured for them to sit. "Ladies," he began, "we need to discuss what happened this morning." Renee folded her arms. "If this is about the food, it's not about the food," Christopher cut in firmly. "It's about the catering order." A flicker of unease crossed Renee's face. Christopher opened a thin folder on his desk. "Security reviewed our phone logs. Someone called the catering company last night and canceled Valerie's order." He lifted his gaze. "That call came from your office phone, Renee." Renee's lips parted. "That's impossible. I don't know how." "Please don't insult my intelligence," Christopher said, voice low and steady. "The call was made using your extension, at a time you were still in the building. We also have camera confirmation of you entering your office at 7:40 p.m. Her composure cracked. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're taking the word of a kitchen hobbyist over mine." Valerie flinched at the insult, but Christopher didn't even glance her way. "This is sabotage," he said calmly. "You attempted to undermine an important meeting to make a junior employee fail. That is completely unacceptable." Renee surged to her feet. "You're going to fire me over her." "Yes," Christopher answered without hesitation. The single word hit the room like a hammer. Renee's face twisted with outrage. She spun toward Valerie with eyes full of venom, then stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. Silence settled. Valerie sank slightly in her chair, shaken by the confrontation, shaken by the cruelty she had endured, and by the surreal way the day had unfolded. Christopher closed the folder and came around the desk, his voice softening as he approached. "Valerie," he said gently, "what you did today, very few people could have done." His gaze held hers, steady and warm. "You have heart, real talent, and integrity. I don't want to lose someone like you." Her breath caught in her throat. He hesitated, searching her face. "I also don't want to pretend I don't feel something more." Valerie's cheeks warmed instantly. "So," he continued quietly, "would you allow me to take you to dinner tonight? Somewhere quiet, somewhere nice." She swallowed hard, managing a shy, breathless smile. "Yes, I'd like that very much." A rare, unguarded smile spread across his face. "Good," he murmured, taking her hand with gentle certainty. For the first time all day, Valerie felt the chaos settle, replaced by something soft, steady, and unexpectedly hopeful. When Valerie stepped out of Christopher Lowell's office, her heart still fluttering from everything he had said, she barely had time to breathe before an assistant appeared carrying a bouquet, an enormous, breathtaking arrangement of fresh flowers in soft pinks and whites. "For you," the assistant said with a warm smile, "from Mr. Lowell." Valerie took the bouquet carefully, her fingers brushing the delicate petals. The scent enveloped her instantly, sweet, comforting, overwhelming in the best possible way. As she walked through the office toward the elevators, conversations halted. Co-workers who had whispered about her just days earlier now stared openly, wide-eyed, stunned, speechless. No one said a word. They simply watched her, the same in turn they used to dismiss, holding a bouquet from the CEO himself. She didn't linger. She didn't explain. And she didn't return to Lowell and Company. After that day, in the months that followed, her life transformed in gentle, unexpected ways. Christopher's quiet home in Lake Oswego, once a cavern of polished floors, echoing hallways and untouched rooms, began to change the moment Valerie moved in. The emptiness softened. Warmth crept into every corner. Her rows of glass jars appeared first, lining the kitchen shelves in neat, colorful formation. Spices, dried berries, homemade jams, grains, herbs, oils. The house slowly filled with the comforting scents of baking bread, simmering fruit, cinnamon, and freshly kneaded dough. Christopher came home each evening to laughter, music, and the soft clutter of real life. For the first time in years, he began to feel the presence of a home rather than a building. Valerie, too, found something she hadn't expected. A place where she wasn't being judged, belittled, or rushed. A place where her quirks weren't weaknesses, but parts of her that Christopher cherished. Day by day, the lonely house became theirs. Exactly 1 year after that chaotic meeting, Valerie was wheeled into a birthing suite at St. Vincent's Hospital. Hours later, Christopher held his newborn daughters in shaking hands, 2 tiny, perfect girls, wailing with lungs far too strong for their size. Twins. Valerie, exhausted and glowing, laughed softly. "2 of them," she whispered. "Just like the jars of cherries I always keep doubled." Christopher's eyes filled with tears. "Then they already have their nickname," he murmured. "The Cherries." It stuck instantly. As the months passed, the twin girls, red-cheeked, energetic, always giggling, filled the Lake Oswego home with even more life. Valerie and Christopher often found themselves watching the girls toddle through the kitchen, leaving trails of flour on the floor, reaching for their mother's jars with curious fingers. And every time they looked at them, they remembered the moment everything began. A rushed delivery, a mistaken identity, a warm kitchen, cherry pies that tasted like childhood. Love had grown from kindness, from authenticity, from the warmth of a home-cooked meal, and it had turned 2 lonely lives into a family.